an assumption. Why? I really want to know the answer right now. Why should women and minorities, why should I be motivated to do that work no matter what? My primary purpose of my career is the pursuit of the truth. So, on a few occasions on this channel, I have roasted articles in Nature because Nature has gotten really woke, for lack of a better word, and I basically don't think all that highly of Nature, despite its reputation for publishing and, like, what is it, like a 7% acceptance rate, I think, in here. But you might find this video surprising, because I might actually throw Nature a bone here with this particular article, which is, we'll see, given the title. Discrimination still plagues science. Which in this case, they're talking about the profession, not the practice. Employers need to do more to improve workplace diversity and equity and inclusion, a Nature survey finds. Again, I think I've said it before, but I can say it again. I don't necessarily think the idea of pushing more diversity in science and inclusion in science is a bad thing. It's not. On its broad perspective, there are disparities that exist, and that's acknowledging that. I don't necessarily agree with some of the reasons being put forward why those disparities exist, and so I'm not going to necessarily go in that direction. But there is something to this that I skimmed it briefly, and I saw something at the end, which I think is going to be a surprise, because I wasn't sure that Nature would publish this, so I'm going to give them kudos for doing so. And so let's walk through this. Where this comes from is actually Nature every 3 years does a workplace satisfaction and job and salary satisfaction survey of scientists in different careers across the world here. And so let's get into that, because this article is one of 4 that were written in Nature based upon this survey that was done here. And I actually have the data here open in another tab. You can see they actually provide this data, so you I'll link the main article in the description, but there is a link in the article to get a hold of all the data associated with that survey. So if you want to download it and have a look, you absolutely can. Let's begin, shall we? Social protest movements such as Me Too and Black in STEM have shown a light on the need for greater diversity, equity, and inclusion at scientific institutions worldwide. And Nature's 2021 Salary and Job Satisfaction Survey, which drew responses from more than 3,200 working scientists around the world, suggests that there's much more work to do. Okay. Just 40% of respondents felt that their employers were doing enough to promote diversity, down from 51% in 2018, when the survey last took place. A substantial minority of respondents said that they had witnessed substantial minority. Notice the framing on that. Substantial minority of respondents said they had witnessed colleagues being subjected to discriminatory behavior, and another sizable minority said that they had experienced such treatment themselves. The self-selected survey, see Nature's Salary and Job Survey, included a list of questions that explored attitudes and experiences related to diversity. Follow-up interviews with the selected respondents and free text comments have helped to fill out the picture. Okay, self-selected in this case means it was an online link here, or it was pushed out there. It was pushed out there primarily online, primarily on Nature's things here, primarily online. And if you wanted to participate, you could. If you didn't want to participate, you didn't have to participate. You didn't have to click the link. Things like that. That's what they mean by self-selected in here. The respondents reflect the relative homogeneity of science in some parts of the world. 82% of respondents in the United Kingdom, 81% in Germany, and 74% in the United States identified themselves as white. The free text comment section exposed conflicting viewpoints on an often polarizing topic. A late-career Asian woman working in geology and environmental sciences at a European university wrote, quote, "Academics like to think of their community as free-spirited and innovative, but there is massive systemic discrimination and power hierarchies that ruin people and careers, and this is suffocating science and discouraging early career academics." So, I want more context to that, obviously, is my main thing there. So I'm gonna say, I'm going to say on that one. But a white male professor of social sciences in the United States offered a different perspective. Quote, "When I say I have experienced and seen gender discrimination, it has always been against males. For example, we were told directly during a job search that we could not hire a white male, even though our relative representation of women and minorities is higher than average for our field. White males have long felt there is a little likelihood of approval for sabbaticals or positive promotion decisions from the dean and upper administration." So there's two different anecdotal things here going on. Obviously, that those two things are anecdotal. I cannot make a conclusion off of either one. If I'm going by it, what I would go by as a scientist, what's the evidence? Some people think that the renewed emphasis on diversity and inclusion in science is overblown and unnecessary, says Zenobia Lewis, an evolutionary ecologist at the University of Liverpool in the UK. She's heard men say that gender equality initiatives in science, such as Athena's Swan Charter, are no longer necessary because women have made gains. The charter, launched in the United Kingdom in 2005, was introduced in Ireland 10 years later, with similar schemes now running in the United States, Canada, and Australia. My response is that it's about equality for all, not just women, says Lewis, who identifies as part Persian. I'm a brown person in ecology, and there aren't many of us. The survey suggests that discrimination remains common in science, seeing room for improvement. Overall, 32% of respondents said that they had witnessed discrimination or harassment of colleagues in their current job. That's up slightly from 28% who reported such behavior in 2018. 27% of respondents said that they had personally experienced discrimination, bullying, or harassment in their present position. Again, that's up with 2018, when 21% said they had firsthand experiences. So this is the graphic in question. With that, significant minority is what they're talking about, but this is quite a minority. If you answered yes to the above, which of the following have you experienced or observed? Power imbalances, experienced or observed. So that's the largest one because that's more than 60% in both experienced and observed. Last I checked, just having an imbalance of power does not necessarily constitute bullying, discrimination, or harassment. So I'd like to know why that was included in the survey to begin with, because that doesn't necessarily constitute that. You can have an imbalance of power and still not have people bully you or harass you or discriminate against you. That doesn't make any sense. And that rings very much of postmodernist thought and critical theory right there, because to them it is all about power. Who has the power and who doesn't in here. So, again, I don't think that's necessarily legit right there as being actual bullying, discrimination, or harassment. Remember, the question is, have you experienced or observed bullying, discrimination, or harassment? And if you answered yes, which of the following have you experienced or observed? A power imbalance. Well, how do you experience or observe that? In all seriousness, how do you experience or observe that? And is that really bullying or harassment? Being in a leadership position, which is a position of authority and power in a center, does not necessarily mean you are bullying, harassing, or anything of the like to your employees or otherwise. Likewise, being a senior staff member doesn't mean you are bullying anybody else above or below you necessarily. That position of power doesn't necessarily mean that. Just because there is people who are in roles of authority and have a little bit more power than others doesn't necessarily mean that. But if you're meaning something else in the sort of woke-ish sense of it, then okay, fine. Then I don't necessarily consider that legit. I don't necessarily consider that seriously important. I guess what I'm asking is, what the heck is the definition of that? What do you mean by a power imbalance? That's what I mean there. I would suspect it's the critical theory version of it, but I'm not sure the way this is reformed, and that's why I can't necessarily take this particular part of it here seriously, because I don't know what the hell that means in this context. Particularly since I don't necessarily consider an imbalance of power, having an imbalance of power being bullying, discrimination, or harassment. That doesn't make sense either. Bullying is the highest one. Here, with more than 50%, and that's nasty if that's happening. No, don't. And again, this is 50% of the folks who said yes, so it's really like 15% of the total. 15% of the total observe that. And it goes even lesser down here until you get to this kind of stuff. Do you believe your workplace is doing enough to promote safe working environment? So significantly yes. That's more than 60% saying yes. Ableism, disability, equality. Equality or equity? Because if you start using them interchangeably, when I know they don't mean the same thing, in here, no, equality and equity are not necessarily the same thing, in here. So I wonder what they mean by this. Do they mean equality in the actual sense, or do they mean equity? Ethnic and racial equality, gender equality, diversity in the workforce. So these two, okay, there's a bunch in here that are pretty low. So I mean, there's a lot of these things. So like I'm saying here, what do you mean by equality? Do you mean equality or do you mean equity? Those are two very different things, and that would be whomever answered the survey. What do you mean? What is your definition of that word? And does it line up more with the actual definition of equality or the definition of equity? And the same thing goes here for diversity. Diversity of what? Diversity of what? Is what I again have to say. I mean, just saying diversity, I value diversity, is almost meaningless to me. Diversity of what? Do you value the diversity of people, of the individuals? But that's what I don't know. Did your employer strengthen its focus on diversity as a result of movements like Black Lives Matter, Shutdown STEM, Me Too, etc.? Pretty damn split, actually. Which I don't think I'm going to say what I was thinking there, but I may save it for my locals, because we have Thursday Thoughts coming up, and Thursday Thoughts I do live on locals for my supporters only, so come join us there. Unsurprisingly, some groups are more likely than others to feel targeted. Women reported experiencing mistreatment more often than men, 34% to 21%. That is still that's a significant percentage, and yes, we should work to make it lower in there. But at the same time, well, we should work to make it lower. Definitely, for sure, I think on that one. But still, that's an interesting. All right. Unsurprisingly, some groups are more likely than others to feel targeted. Women reported experiencing mistreatment more often than men, 34% to 21%. Workers in academia were twice as likely as those in industry to report such behavior, 30% to 15%. So wait a second. So does this number include both women and men? Anyway, a woman who is now a staff scientist at a U.S. biomedical company wrote of her experience in academia, quote, "I was bullied and harassed repeatedly at my previous job, and literally nothing there has changed or will ever change. My current job is much nicer, but I will never work in an academic setting again. A postdoc in the lab kept touching my hair, and the university did absolutely nothing to protect me or stop it." No, that's wrong that happened to you. That's wrong that happened to you. That postdoc, whomever they are, probably should have been very much disciplined over that to begin with, and the university did nothing about it. So yes, that's wrong. That should never have happened here, and you would have been well within your rights to smack the guy for doing that. In my view, because that probably would have been my reaction. If you're going to run your hands through my hair without my permission, I am going to turn around and smack you. Open slap of the hand. You'd have earned it. Overall, 17% of women and 1% of men in the survey report being the target of gender discrimination. Sexism remains rampant, says survey respondent Fiona Simpson, a cancer researcher at the University of Queensland in Brisbane, Australia. Everybody talks about equality in science, but it doesn't actually happen, she says. There are so many articles, so much discussion, but over 30 years, it's gotten worse. Okay, so again, one person's thing there is anecdotal. 17% of women is the number there. Report being the target of gender discrimination. 1% of men. So, again, we need to work to make that number lower. But 17% doesn't necessarily mean that such things are rampant either. Simpson says that sexism was more outward and obvious in her early career, but in her view, the more subtle discrimination of today can be just as damaging. Quote, "I've watched female academics get upset over the way they're being treated or the instability of their roles. When they're emotional, they're written off as unstable or hormonal. It's changed from an overt thing to a type of gaslighting," she says, referring to the manipulative behavior that makes some question their own sanity. Gaslighting is nasty here, and no, you shouldn't necessarily be. Shouldn't be doing it ever. Gaslighting is pretty damn nasty. Happens a lot actually with the woke left, as well as many others. Nasty form of argumentation. It's very flawed. Um, Ethnicity can be an important factor too, especially in countries where the scientific workforce is predominantly white. In the United Kingdom, for example, 27 of the 54 respondents who did not identify as white said they had personally experienced discrimination, bullying, or harassment on the job. That's nearly twice the rate reported by 357 respondents in the United Kingdom. The United States, the 221 respondents who did not identify as white were also more likely than the white colleagues to report such experiences, 33% to 25%. So wait a second. In the United States, the respondents who did not identify as white were also more likely than white colleagues to report such experiences. More likely to report such experiences. That's different. Because you can have an experience and not report it, too. That's the thing I'm thinking there. So, interesting. Because you can have experiences and not report it too. That's the thing. And I'm going to get to the end here. And just it was a weird phrasing. I don't know quite how to respond to that because that's a weird phrasing of that question of that sentence to me. Anyway, among those reporting personal experiences of mistreatment, the most commonly cited instances fall into the categories of power imbalances. Again, I have no idea what that is. And just having an imbalance of power does not mean that something of the line of bullying or discrimination happened. And bullying. The most commonly reported forms of discrimination were related to gender, age, and race. Age discrimination was a recurring complaint in the comments section. A government employee in South Africa wrote that, quote, job advancement for older people is now a huge challenge due to the pressure to advance young people. A self-employed U.S. scientist in the field of astronomy and planetary science wrote, quote, when I lost my previous job as a result of funding cuts, a great majority of people laid off were older than 50, even though that age group did not comprise a majority of employees. Also, I know 3 people in that age range who were repeatedly rejected for positions for which they were extremely well qualified in favor of younger hires. One of them, who has two PhD, has basically given up looking and basically retired early. Get rid of the wise people, apparently. Less than 1% of respondents reported experiencing discrimination against people from sexual and gender minorities. That rate is essentially unchanged compared with the 2018 survey. South African researcher in ecology evolution wrote, as a lesbian, I think my job prospects are better than they would have been just 10 years ago because of cultural shifts and also legal changes in South Africa regarding employment equity. Only 7% of respondents reported a disability, a reflection of widely acknowledged lack of representation of this community in scientific fields. Disabled people face particular career challenges in science, says Michelle Moram, a London-based materials scientist who is currently working remotely for Victoria University of Wellington, New Zealand. In 2010, Moram was diagnosed with a serious autoimmune disorder, which would have qualified her for disability protection under the law. Still, she keeps the illness hidden for years for fear of jeopardizing her chances of promotion. I don't understand why that would jeopardize a chance of promotion if it's just an autoimmune disease. So that's more context. More context is what I would want for that, but entirely her choice if she wishes to reveal that. A truly diverse research system would employ people from a range of socioeconomic backgrounds, but Lewis says people from poor families remain at a distinct disadvantage. She co-wrote a paper exploring how socioeconomic background as well as ethnicity can affect early career progression in the fields of ecology and evolution. One finding, early career researchers from less privileged backgrounds tend to have positions with a teaching component rather than ones wholly devoted to research, the latter often more prestigious for career progression. Moram, the first member of her family to attend university, says she struggled to find her place in science after moving from University of College Cork, Ireland, to take up a PhD at the University of Cambridge in the UK in 2003. Quote, my family is what they call underclass in the United Kingdom. Part of my journey was learning to pass as a middle-class person. I had to change my accent, learn different vocabulary, wear different clothes, just to fake it to be a different person. So what's talking about there is something called code switching, which is basically, you you're a different person essentially at work than you are at home, and this might be a little difficult, but this is my opinion. I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing to be a little bit different at work than you are at home, or that you are on YouTube, on the internet, ranting away, for instance. Um, there's different things that are required of you in those different positions and what have you. So I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. It's up to you to incorporate all of that in the entirety of your identity, as far as I believe with that. But I understand what she's getting at, because that is difficult, and that didn't necessarily come from a rich family either. I am the first in my family to have a PhD. So I can understand that. Really, I can. Moram says her background helped motivate her to study especially hard. Quote, I had no idea how anything in the system worked at all. I just decided to work hard at whatever I could, she says. It was important for me to get out of home. I was terrified of having to go back home and work in a shop. A slim majority of respondents felt that their institutions were doing enough to promote gender equity. See, that's equity. That's equity. The question up there was equality. This is, again, why I ask, are you conflating equality and equity to mean the same thing when they do not? Down from 58% in 2018, 41% thought that their place of employment was doing enough to promote ethnic or racial equality. See, now you're switching words again. Down from 52% in 2018. It's not surprising that the number of people who are overwhelmed by their employer's approach to diversity, underwhelmed rather, by their employer's approach to diversity is growing, says Maria Maritini, a plant ecologist at Ohio State University in Columbus. Miratini wrote a paper exploring strategies to boost recruitment and retention of people from minority groups in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Sounds like a paper I should read. Quote, people's awareness of the breadth of inequality has become more focused in the pandemic, she says. There's a pressure to respond, but really getting into the trenches to change the system to promote greater equality and inclusion is hard. Again, do you mean equality or do you mean equity? Miratiri, I apologize. Pronunciation today is not my thing. Says that fundamental changes are needed to improve equity in STEM, starting with rethinking how scientists are evaluated and promoted. Quote, we value grantsmanship, the ability to secure grants, publications, and citations. All three of those factors can be affected by racial and gender discrimination. Scientists act like it's a level playing field. It's hard for us to accept that recognition can be tied to gender and race. I want to... Oh, well, not now. I'm not going to get into that one right now. Let's finish this. Otherwise, this is going to be a long video. Just over 1/4 of respondents felt that their institutions had increased their focus on diversity in response to social justice movements such as Black Lives Matter and Me Too. The former gained momentum following the murder in May 2020 of George Floyd, an unarmed black man, by a police officer in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Me Too protests accelerated in 2017 in response to sexual abuse allegations related to film producer Harvey Weinstein. Lewis is underwhelmed by institutions' responses. Quote, there was suddenly this wave of organizations and institutions putting out statements of solidarity, she says. Quote, it's about a year on and I'm still waiting to see how much impact it's actually going to have or whether it's just paying lip service. Two things on that. It's because it probably is just paying lip service. There's a lot of virtue signaling in these different things. Also sometimes very negative actions taken that actually tend to increase discrimination. Let me point you to example to the attempted DEI efforts at the California Department of Fish and Wildlife that has hence resulted in a lawsuit of the employees of the California Department of Fish and Wildlife against the leadership because the initiatives of DEI there actually resulted in more discrimination, more racial discrimination, but at that institution in violation of California civil rights law and U.S. civil rights law, and hence there's a lawsuit against the leadership of the department. So there's also that. There's the lip service. There's the fact that some of these actions are actually having the opposite effect of what you would like. And again, go back to the Is Diversity Training Effective video on this channel, and you will get my take on that one and all the myriad evidence there is that diversity training just doesn't work. A lot of these initiatives don't work because they continue to promote... They continue to stereotype people and turn people into caricatures. Essentially, most people don't like that. Or at least that seems to be the observation, anyway, of sociologists when they go look at these things and the effectiveness of such efforts as what Lewis is talking about in this article. Many universities and companies have established diversity committees to improve the recruitment and retention of members of underrepresented groups, but their reach remains limited. Just over 12% of respondents said that they had participated in an institution-wide diversity committee, and 21% weren't sure if such committees even existed at their place of work. Women are more likely to participate in such committees, 14 to 9%. Miridi thinks that diversity communities can be important drivers for change, especially in academia. Quote, universities should absolutely have diversity committees, she says. Quote, there's too much change that needs to happen if we're serious about increasing broad participation in our scientific disciplines. However, she warns that involvement in such committees isn't always highly valued when it comes to promotion and tenure. Still, she says, the investment in time and energy can pay off by bringing new people to the table. Quote, women and minorities should be motivated to do this work no matter what. Women and minorities should be motivated to do this work no matter what. Why? Why? Wait. I have to ask that. Why? Why should they be the ones motivated to do this work all the time, no matter what? What? That's a heck of an assumption. Why? I really want to know the answer right now. Why should women and minorities, why should I be motivated to do that work no matter what? My primary purpose of my career is the pursuit of the truth with respect to my work in climate science. There's a heck of an assumption there that certain groups should be motivated to do this. These groups should be motivated to do the work, no matter what. Yeah, no, honey, don't tell me what to do. You don't get to tell me what I'm motivated by, that I should be motivated to do this. You don't get to tell me that, period. Shut up. Miridi adds that I'm sorry, that just gets me heated. You never, ever presume to tell me what I should or should not do. I get really pissed with that. Miridi adds that more people from majority groups, for example, white men in countries such as the United States and the United Kingdom, should participate in diversity committees, but only if they're willing to invest time and truly address the issues. Quote, it's important to avoid what some refer to as performative allyship, she says. Avoid virtue signaling, plain and simple. Some researchers have given up fighting bias. A biomedical postdoctoral researcher of Iranian descent in Canada wrote, quote, I've actually identified some perks to being discriminated against. For one, I don't have to deal with the responsibilities that come with more senior title. As long as I stay productive, I will likely have a job and more time for research. I can walk away with the knowledge that I earned every penny and at times gave more than I took. There is comfort in that. Okay. And this is actually the part at the end that I wanted to get to because there's some interesting quotes in here. When they ask the question, free text comment question, how do you feel about diversity, equity, and inclusion in science? And there were some responses here that I didn't think Nature would publish, to be honest, given some of their particular leanings in the last few years. I did not think they would publish them. So I figured I would read some of these, and then we will close out this particular video. Free text comments in Nature's Global Salary and Job Satisfaction Survey highlight scientists' thoughts on issues they have encountered in their careers. Comments have been edited for length and clarity and, when necessary, translated into English. I feel there is too much focus on hiring diverse candidates based on easily measurable criteria, gender and race, and not enough focus on diversity of thought and supporting existing employees through challenges such as maternity and disability. This is a postdoc in biomedical in the UK. I have recently felt that being white and middle-aged is an impediment to seeking positions such as an associate dean or dean, professor of social sciences in the U.S. As a white person, I am not offered promotional opportunities, so I am stuck in the same job for over 15 years, staff scientist in government in South Africa. Potential employers do not like to hire females due to the possibility that they will have childcare responsibilities, although this is never stated officially. More than half of the postdocs in my department are female, but the principal investigator level, 80 to 90% of them, are white men. What happens to all those female postdocs? Postdoc in the biomedical field in Denmark. I have never felt I have white privilege because I've struggled so much and overcome extreme hardships to get where I am now. But now I'm still overshadowed because I'm not a person whose race or ethnicity is diverse. Technician in biomedical field, USA. The people who didn't hire diverse staff and faculty before are still in charge, taking credit for being diverse now, but in fact they aren't improving anything. They will continue to hire mediocre elites and complement it with some goofy, diverse candidates-only job openings. Some great researchers will leave academia because of this, and history will repeat itself. Our university has a university level, college level, and school level committees to promote equality, diversity, and inclusion for years now. Although I've been heavily involved at many levels, it has been clear for me to sometimes that these have been instituted for the sake of 1, public visibility, 2, access to research funding, funders tied to EDI, funders have funding tied to EDI initiatives. There is very little real appetite to change what is wrong with the institution. So I didn't think I would see some of these in here. And there's actually quite a balance, which I give nature credit for actually talking about it, because there is certain things here. And I mean, the funding thing I saw reminds me of the video from last week about them actually imposing ideology into grant funding in Canada. That you can't simply say that you're going to be treating everybody the same and that you value merit and what have you. No, you have to put in some kind of plan on how you're going to advance diversity, equity, inclusion, even if you don't agree with what those ideals and values are at this point. So it's a value screening that's being used in grant funding in Canada. And dear God, I hope it doesn't come to the US, but I think it probably will. And I mean, I don't like the DEI statements. I flat out said to a number of people that I think the DEI statements are ideological litmus tests and they should not be used in candidate job searches. So I'm not looking forward to that for myself at any time in the near future. But this is interesting. There's a lot of interesting stuff in here. Again, I will link this in the description. I encourage you to go look at it. I don't necessarily agree with nature here. And they're talking about, admittedly, the way they worded this is as discrimination. So I give nature credit that they didn't primarily jump in here and say, you know, this discrimination is caused by this. This discrimination is caused by this. I give them credit that they didn't jump in and say that they let some of the respondents say it, if that was appropriate. Again, I ask the question, what the hell is power imbalances in your thing? That's not necessarily... Having an imbalance of power in an institution does not necessarily mean that one is the subject of harassment, bullying, or discrimination. It could just as easily be that somebody's in a big leadership role. They have more power and control over different things, and yeah, that happens. But that doesn't necessarily mean... So that I just don't know. That doesn't necessarily mean that people are being discriminated against or being bullied or being harassed. That doesn't necessarily mean it. It could, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. So I don't understand what power imbalances is in this particular situation, nor do I understand how it can be considered a form of bullying, harassment, and discrimination in here, the way that was worded. But that's some of my critiques with the survey. I may go peruse the survey data myself and see if there's anything interesting I can find. But anyway, that's it for now. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, hit the like button on the way out the door. Comment on the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, all that good jazz. And don't forget, pop on over to Locals. We'll be doing more stuff just for supporters next year in 2022. I'm already brainstorming some ideas. And of course, Thursday Thoughts is live with my supporters at 8 p.m. Central Time every Thursday, with the exception, I think, probably the week of Christmas and the week of New Year's. I probably won't. But I will certainly be back the first week of the New Year. But get this week and next week, don't forget. Anyway, till next time, I'm Adrienne. I hope you stay curious.